The British had gradually become superior to the French at sea, yet they had never vigorously exploited that superiority in North America because they consistently gave priority to war in Europe. That's where they've got colonies. Eventually they're going to have colonies all over the whole world. So they have to prioritize the British islands. And because they had considerable difficulty containing a French navy that avoided battle and concentrated on raiding commerce and colonies. Thus, during King William's War, the French were able not just to batter British merchant shipping in the North Atlantic, but also to protect New France while nearly destroying British posts in Newfoundland and Hudson Bay. Because the French were, even though the British were gaining on them in the naval sense, in the sense of naval power, the French still had total free reign in all the areas where they were at war with the British, because the British were concentrating on Europe. So the French couldn't go to Europe, fine, but their navy could take care of lots of stuff otherwise. So they nearly destroyed the British posts in Newfoundland and Hudson Bay. Until the last years of Queen Anne's War, the French continued to have the advantage in North American waters. Only at the end of Queen Anne's War were the British able to spare ships for expeditions against New France and to surpass the French in commerce raiding. It was Marlborough and Eugene's success in the Low Countries, look into that if you like, Marlborough, like the cigarette brand, him and a guy named Eugene, E-U-G-E-N-E, in the Low Countries, it was their success, the strength of the British economy, and skillful diplomacy that enabled Britain to gain Nova Scotia, Hudson Bay, Newfoundland, and, get this, to boot, trading privileges in the Spanish Empire at the Peace of Utrecht, U-T-R-E-C-H-T. Trading privileges in the Spanish Empire. You remember how controlled these economies are and how they separate trade, and they don't want anyone buying anything from anybody except their own country. Every country thinks like that. So how could they ever be able to go in and buy and sell stuff in Spain? Well, it was things like this that eventually clued people in. Well, we should have been doing that all along. How stupid of us not to have had free trade, as we now call it. The antagonisms that marred Anglo-American efforts to cooperate in Queen Anne's War reappeared in a more virulent form in King George's War in 1739-48, a 9-year war. At the beginning of King George's War, the colonists were eager to cooperate with British regular forces in attacking neighboring Spanish colonies to make their frontiers permanently secure for settlement and trade. Permanently secure, not just we'll have a battle once in a while, but we own this land and we want to be able to live here without constant warfare. Yet for all their enthusiasm, undisciplined and inexperienced provincials had great trouble working effectively with professional British soldiers and sailors. See, slaves and free people do things differently. They do not act the same under coercion. In 1740 and 41, Anglo-American expeditions failed to capture Spanish posts at St. Augustine in Florida and at Cartagena on the Spanish Main. Each attempt suffered from disputes between provincials and regulars, and each ended with mutual complaints. Both of them complained about the other one. It's not clear whose fault it was, according to the parties involved. Regulars found provincials dirty, ignorant of war, and difficult to manage. Provincials complained of being treated with contempt. Can you guess? Of being employed more as laborers than soldiers, of being pressed into service on British warships, and of being kept under arms well beyond their periods of enlistment. So there's a growing cleavage between the two cultures. One of them is just less controlled and more free. Now this is in the the 1730s and 40s and 50s and such. One of them, and it's not till 1776 that we declare independence. So it's a cleave that goes way back, where the American colonists were just not as controlled. They just didn't have as much control and force over them. And the British soldiers were very regimented and just couldn't loosen up and fight the Indians in this new style. They had to stick to the old ways. Okay, even the most successful of Anglo-American operations in Georgia's war created disputes and lingering resentments. In 1744, French forces from Cape Breton Island attacked ports in Nova Scotia and the shipping of New England. Angered by these attacks, the governments of Massachusetts organized an expedition against the French base at Louisbourg on Cape Breton, a base established in 1713 on a fine natural harbor and protected by a massive angled bastion fortress that provided a haven for French warships, privateers, and merchantmen on the eastern approaches to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So an angled bastion fortress means a fortress not with regular walls. You don't want perpendicular walls. You don't want it out of just perpendicular stuff. You want angles, and that's why they started doing basically star-shaped type things. 10 or 12 pointed stars and 6 and whatever pointed stars for these forts, because the cannonballs will hit with less destructive force if they glance off than if they hit at a direct straight angle. A hit like that's different from a hit like that, where a lot of the force that was in the cannonball gets transferred into a different direction, where the force in the cannonball gets transferred, all of it goes right into the wall. So it makes it more difficult to line up your shots than just broadsiding a huge side of a barn, as it were. Angled bastion fortresses. Massachusetts raised, I'll have to say that's related. There was another principle that popped up later during World War II, just at the beginning of the war. They discovered radar acts the same way, and that if you, or certain things, sound waves or whatever, act the same way, and then they discovered radar, and then they discovered a way to go against radar, which is to make angles on planes, and that's why you see no right angles at all on our stealth fighter craft and bombers and stuff, because right angles reflect radar more efficiently than left angles. Haha, just kidding. Massachusetts raised and funded 2,800 provincial troops. These men, commanded by a prominent colonist, sailed from Boston in March 1745. Pause for a second there. A prominent colonist. Now, did he do that for glory? Did he do that out of a sense of duty, responsibility to his community, a desire to make some difference, a desire not to sit back and watch his society be destroyed? Or did he do it because he was oppressed and lacked an opportunity, and he thought this would give him an opportunity? All the first things I said are normal and reasonable. The last thing, that the reason he went out and a prominent colonist went out and commanded this expedition, was because either he was forced into it, according to Marxism, or he did it because he had few prospects at home. He was driven into desperation. Otherwise, you wouldn't leave your home and your family and go out and on a dangerous expedition and so forth. Commanded by a prominent colonist. Why would he go and do that if he's got such a position in the community? Marxism is so stupid. I had to go on that small caveat. At Canso, C-A-N-S-O, in Nova Scotia, they were reinforced by troops from New Hampshire and Connecticut, and by British warships from the West Indies. The whole, entire thing, now under the joint command of a provincial general and a British admiral, proceeded to Cape Breton and took Louisbourg by siege and blockade. The colonists were elated with the victory, but dismayed to find their contributions were little appreciated by the British. Of course, the British were like, yeah, then that rabble took over some stupid little fort. And that they were neither to be fully reimbursed for their expenses, nor to be permitted to share in the prize money,